Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final session of our 5-part BRIC Summer Engagement Series. I've been so encouraged over the last 5 weeks by how much interest has been shown in our new program. So last week, we dove deep into FEMA's Community Lifelines and spent an hour talking about what they were and how they play a part in the BRIC program. And today, we're going to cover a couple of really important topics. That includes nature-based solutions and future conditions. So before we get started, let me do a little housekeeping as usual. We are recording today's session because we know a lot of people couldn't get in or can't be available at this time slot. So this session will be recorded and will be added to our playlist on FEMA YouTube. Also, please know, because of our jam-packed agenda we have with all of our great speakers, we have muted all the lines, and we will not be taking questions and answers live in this session. If you are having any kind of technical difficulties, you'll see a pod in the Adobe Connect where you can type your technical questions in, and we'll have a moderator help you. You'll also see a file downloads pod on the Adobe Connect, and that's where you can find a copy of today's presentation, our infographic or flyer about the BRIC program, and we had so many great resources from our panelists today around nature-based solutions and future conditions that you can find a resource guide to be able to download as well. So in today's session, we have a lot of great speakers, including, you're going to see that I'm going to kick us off and talk about both nature-based solutions and future conditions and how they fit into the BRIC program and why they're important for mitigation. I'm going to flip it over then to Art Von Lee from FEMA and Adam Stein from NOAA, who will explain how changes in future conditions will impact resiliency. We're then going to go over to Abby Hall from EPA, Sarah Murdoch from the Nature Conservancy, and Chad Bergenis from the Association of State Floodplain Managers, or ASFPM, that are going to describe nature-based solutions and how what that involves and how partnerships play an important role in these solutions. Following that, we're going to have some time to have a discussion with each of the panelists, which I'm really looking forward to. So let's get started with a couple of slides from me just to open up the conversation. To start, I wanted just to give a brief introduction to nature-based solutions and future conditions and see how these fit into the BRIC program. We heard a lot from our stakeholders, both in the summer of 2019 and throughout this year, about the importance of nature-based solutions and wanting that to be a part of the BRIC program. We fully agree. So nature-based solutions are sustainable environmental management practices that restore, enhance, or mimic nature and natural systems, which can support natural hazard risk reduction, as well as economic, environmental, and social resiliency efforts. Nature-based solution approaches, some examples we have listed there, but these are not an exhaustive list. But some of these are just the restoration of grasslands, rivers, floodplains, wetlands, dunes, and reefs, living shorelines, soil stabilization, and bioretention systems. The BRIC program will encourage mitigation projects that utilize nature-based solutions that enhance resiliency. When we're talking about future conditions, we're thinking about how changing conditions can impact communities and their resilience over time. And so we have some examples here of the different kinds of topics we're thinking about in future conditions, but we're not limited, as I said, with nature-based solutions. It's not just limited to these, but looking at population changes, demographic changes, climate changes, including sea level rise, and land use and development shifts. We know that mitigation projects that take future conditions or future changes into account will likely help those communities be more resilient as the long run. And that's something we want to do, is we're putting the funds or the assistance into these projects. We want to make sure that they offer benefits over the long haul. I am very excited today to get to share this document. I had a chance to review it about a month ago before it went into final production, and I learned a ton from it about nature-based solutions. So the fact that it is literally hot off the virtual presses, and we're the first ones that get to show it. I'm really excited about. So this new resource, which is titled The Building Community Resiliency with Nature-Based Solutions, a Guide for Local Communities, is a new publication led by our Risk Management Directorate inside of FEMA, and they have let us put it out here as a resource that I'm hope that will help you a lot as you look into nature-based solutions. And you can find a link for it in that resource guide that is in the file download pod. So the key goal of the guide is to help communities along with state, territorial, and tribal governments identify and engage with staff and resources that can play a role in building resilience with nature-based solutions, directly supporting community capability and capacity building efforts, which is, that's one of our guiding principles in BRIC. It also has a lot of great examples of different nature-based solution techniques. This guide, like I said, you can find it on FEMA's website now, and there's a link for that in the resource guide that's in the file download. It's also going to be on the BRIC website very soon. So FEMA would like to express its appreciation to NOAA, their nature-based solutions and coastal community resiliency subject matter experts who provided their valuable and constructive suggestions during the development of this resource. Their willingness to devote their time and expertise so generously to enhance the impact of this resource for communities is greatly appreciated. So I couldn't be more excited than to share that. So to get us started, we're going to break this session kind of into two parts. We're going to start with future conditions first. So I'd like to turn it over to Art Von Lee, who is the Chief of the Resilience Integration and Technology Branch within FEMA's Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation, and Adam Stein, who not only is the Assistant Director of the Data Stewardship Division within NOAA's Center for Environmental Information, but had the chance to spend a couple months with me back last fall when we were really starting to get BRIC off the ground. So Art, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Camille. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. And as Camille said, I'm currently the Resilience Integration Branch Chief for FEMA's Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation. And previously, I've held FEMA's climate change policy portfolio and served as adaptation advisor for FEMA Resilience, which is the side of the agency that houses our non-disaster programs. So, let's see, that's the slide. There we go. So I'll start today with a little context. We're looking here at a photograph of Little Blue, and that's the last cabin standing, or it was, on Hunting Island, South Carolina. In under a decade, the land the island was standing on eroded to the extent that it became submerged. The cabin was finally removed in 2017. So changing conditions like sea level rise are accelerating processes like shoreline change, and the story of this cabin serves as a visual reminder of our need to use future conditions as the basis of our planning and design today. So as you can see here in this graph from our partners at NOAA, the number and cost of disasters are increasing. We're looking at a representation of all billion-dollar disaster events for the past 40 years. The data has been adjusted for inflation, and billion-dollar events account for a large majority, 80%, of the total damage from all recorded U.S. weather and climate events. There's a lot going on in this graph, and you can follow the link at the bottom of this slide to learn more about it. The slides will be available. But what I want to point out here is the trend. So you can obviously see the trend going up from left to right. And the annual average number of billion-dollar weather-related events in the U.S. has gone up from an average of 6.2 events per year from 1980 to 2018 to 12.6 events per year from 2014 to 2018. So what's driving all this change, and what does it mean for our communities and emergency managers? So the changes we're seeing are driven by a number of demographic development and natural hazard trends. Unmitigated land use can result in increased flooding and erosion rates. urban and suburban growth can cause unintended evacuation constraints. Our nation's deteriorating infrastructure becomes more vulnerable by the day to natural disasters. And our aging population is at a higher risk due to disasters from mobility and health challenges. These changes on the ground are colliding with the changes in the climate system. The call to use future conditions in our mitigation planning and projects has never been so urgent. The U.S. government's 2018 National Climate Assessment tells us that we will continue to see shifts from climate change in flooding, heavy downpours, hurricanes, rising temperatures, wildfires, droughts, and heat waves. And as more coastal land is lost to sea level rise, coastal structures will be flooded more frequently and more severely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what FEMA is doing now to support communities in adapting to all of this change. The National Mitigation Investment Strategy provides a single national approach to reduce risks posed by natural hazards while increasing the nation's resilience. Its scope includes both changing conditions and nature-based solutions. Developed by the federal interagency and other non-federal governments, it can be a useful framework to inform your thinking about mitigation. For natural hazards risk assessment, you can use HAZIS, which is FEMA's GIS tool for estimating potential losses from earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and hurricanes. HAZIS users can incorporate future conditions information when entering their hazard data. It can be used to conduct a comparative analysis of current conditions and future conditions, and can inform your hazard mitigation plans and projects by showing you how your risk profile will change over time, so you can decide on and prioritize your projects and resources to address those risks. State hazard mitigation plans are currently required to take changing conditions and climate change into account. Under a state's hazard identification and risk assessment, which is the basis of the state's hazard mitigation plan, states are required to include considerations of changing future conditions. Two recent state plans from Massachusetts and North Carolina have undertaken an integrated approach combining mitigation planning and climate adaptation planning. All of FEMA's hazard mitigation eligible activities can potentially be leveraged as tools for adaptation when future conditions information is used as the basis of your project design. Some newer eligible activities were created with future conditions in mind. These are aquifer storage and recovery, floodwater diversion, storage, and recovery, and floodplain and stream restoration. These activities work well when paired with nature-based design principles. FEMA's Benefit Cost Analysis, or BCA, allows for the inclusion of future conditions information into your project, as well as nature-based design. You can conduct and use your own future conditions analysis as part of your BCA. For sea level rise, there's a field already included in the BCA tool for all coastal projects. If using future conditions in the BCA, you should use the conditions expected at the end of the project useful life. However, in order to include those conditions in your analysis, your project must be designed to protect against those future conditions. For all applicable hazard mitigation assistance activities, FEMA has incorporated ecosystem services into the BCA toolkit. For example, ecosystem service benefits will appear for acquisition projects, but not for elevation projects. The BCA will calculate ecosystem services only if an activity is calculated to have a benefit cost ratio of 0.75 or greater using traditional risk reduction benefits. One of the most important things I can share with you in our short time today is that FEMA has free technical assistance for applying future conditions information into your BCA. So if you look here on my slide, you'll see the information. Just write BC helpline at fema.dhs.gov or call toll-free 1-855-540-6744 to access your free technical assistance. It's also worth noting that the community rating system provides for additional credits for both nature-based design and the use of sea level rise information. So now that I've talked about FEMA resources, I'm going to hand it over to Adam Stein from NOAA to discuss how to access future conditions information. Adam?
Thanks, Art. So my name is Adam Stein. I'm a Senior Coastal Hazard Specialist with the NOAA Office for Coastal Management. I want to start by thanking Camille and Art and the whole team over at FEMA who've been working so hard to create the BRIC program. Over at NOAA, we really appreciate your commitment to engaging the network and mitigation partners throughout the entire process, and in particular, your commitment to partnership with so many agencies and organizations has been fantastic, so thank you. Move on to my first slide. So I'm excited to be here to talk to you about our data and information resources and some places you can turn for technical assistance from NOAA and considering future conditions in your BRIC applications. My message to you today is that you are not alone, that there is a wealth of information that is out there, and there is a vast network of partners that are standing by to assist, and I hope that I'm able to potentially introduce you to some new partners today. As Art indicated, the past is no longer a sufficient predictor of the future. The information I'll share with you in this presentation today is critical to ensuring that the risks are adequately managed. Art referred to the National Climate Assessment. Before I get into NOAA resources, I want to make sure I highlight this publication. The National Climate Assessment, the fourth assessment was recently completed in 2018, and this particular volume 2, titled Impacts, Risks, and Adaptation, is the authoritative source in the United States, and it was written specifically for emergency planners and other decision makers. So I want to make sure that everyone is aware of this resource and that you refer to it in your consideration of future conditions. Now I'm going to step through some NOAA data and information resources. The first I want to talk about is the Digital Coast. The Digital Coast is a great resource for downloading coastal data for the nation, but it's more than just data. It's a great resource. It has value-added tools. It has access to training and lots of case studies, and many of which focus on coastal hazard mitigation techniques. A powerful element of our Digital Coast is our partnership. Although NOAA administers the Digital Coast, it's driven by our network of national partners, 2 of which are on the webinar with us today, ASFPM and the Nature Conservancy. So we couldn't do the work that we do to the Digital Coast without their contributions and support. I'd like to highlight 2 tools within the Digital Coast that I think are critical for considering future coastal flooding, and that's the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper and the Sea Level Rise Viewer. Both of these tools are fantastic resources for understanding and visualizing future coastal flooding. NOAA also monitors sea level through our network of 98 tide gauges, and we also develop assessments on high tide flooding. This is happening increasingly due to sea level rise, and each year we document the changes in high tide flooding patterns, and we provide a flooding outlook not only for the coming year, but also projections into the next several decades. I want to highlight that the State of High Tide Flooding Report was just released for 2019. It provides an outlook through April of 21, and it's a great resource for understanding future sea level rise trends. I also want to highlight another set of NOAA-supported resources, the Climate Resilience Toolkit and the Climate Explorer. Both of these are great resources for assisting you in identifying experts in your geography, accessing climate-related reports, learning about other tools, both from NOAA and other agencies and organizations, and also provides you access to state-level climate summaries through the Climate Explorer. Now I'll turn to our network of partners that can assist in providing some technical assistance in accessing some of the information on future conditions and also applying nature-based solutions in your BRIC projects. The first that I want to highlight are the state coastal management programs. Each of the 34 state coastal management programs have close relationships with coastal communities. They have really valuable perspectives on hazard mitigation needs, and many coastal programs already coordinate with emergency managers and state hazard mitigation officers. These are a great network of folks to turn to for assistance and partnership. I also want to highlight that a list of NOAA's regional coastal management directors is included in the handout, and it has their email addresses. So these are great people to reach out to get connected with state coastal management programs. In addition, NOAA also works with state partners to maintain a network of the National Estuarine Research Reserves. These reserves are also valuable sources of information on future conditions and nature-based solutions, and a link to their website is also included in the handout. I'll next want to highlight the RISA program, Regional Integrated Science and Assessment. There are 11 climate adaptation and preparedness engagement teams, primarily based at universities. These are climate preparedness experts. They're armed with the most current information and resources for adaptation, and they live in the communities they serve. These are great places to turn for assistance if there's one in your geography. I also want to highlight the National Center for Environmental Information, which maintains 6 regional climate centers. These centers support the development or research and development of data and information on climate at a regional scale. These centers are complemented by 3 regional climate service directors who are also excellent points of contact for stakeholders looking for climate information. Their contact information is also included in the handout. And all of these folks work very closely with the 47 state climatologists that provide state-level climate across the country, state-level climate information for their states across the country. The last group I want to introduce you to is the Sea Grant College Program. These are great places to turn for support. The Sea Grant Network includes 33 university-based programs. There's one in every coastal state and Great Lakes state, also Puerto Rico and Guam. One of Sea Grant's 4 priorities is building resilient communities and economies, and many of these state programs have substantial experience in coastal resilience projects. Lastly, I want to also mention that we provide technical assistance and information, tools, and training to help build the capacity for the use of nature-based solutions as well. I've listed many of the resources from across NOAA in the handout. I want to mention that we are in the process of developing a new suite of tools focused on using economic approaches to inform decisions around the use of nature-based solutions. This will include an e-learning module and a suite of quick references and case studies. And we do expect these resources to be available through the Digital Coast during the BRIC application period. So in closing, I just want to thank FEMA again for having us along for the ride. And to all the BRIC applicants out there, please know that there's a wealth of information from NOAA on future conditions, and there's a whole network of partners that are standing by to assist you. I really do believe that by working together, we can have the best chance at reducing costs of future disasters. So thank you for your attention, and now I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Abby Hall from the EPA.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the partnership that EPA and FEMA have and some of the projects on the ground that we have supported with states and communities to actually implement green infrastructure in communities and as part of hazard mitigation planning. So we do this work under a formal memorandum of agreement, a partnership between our 2 agencies where we coordinate our activities. So I work for EPA's Office of Community Revitalization, and we're sort of the land use planning smart growth program at EPA. So we coordinate on those types of activities that my office runs, on the ground community technical assistance programs. But we also coordinate our activities when FEMA is on the ground in a state or a community doing long-term recovery planning or hazard mitigation programs. So we do this through technical assistance. We focus on plan review and updates. We do design assistance and code review, looking at local ordinances. And I would say it's not just really, there's this formal partnership between EPA and FEMA, but sort of spinning off of this partnership and this work, we partner with a lot of other federal agencies like Economic Development Administration, National Park Service, NOAA, USDA Rural Development, and the Army Corps of Engineers, sort of taking different pieces of a project and figuring out ways that our different planning requirements or our different data and analysis programs can come together to support a community's goals for long-term disaster resilience.
And then the great thing about these technical assistance projects is it's a two-way street. So we are hoping to provide support to local communities, but we're taking back lessons learned to DC and to our regional offices at EPA and FEMA and with our other federal partners to figure out how we can build a stronger framework for mitigation planning. And then how can we look at those high-level policies around both hazard mitigation planning and climate adaptation across our agencies to have that feedback so that we can support the types of outcomes that communities really want to see in the long term. So what does green infrastructure or nature-based solutions look like at EPA? So we've always thought about green infrastructure at 3 scales. At the really large watershed scale, habitat corridors, thinking about forest, open space preservation, wetlands protection. But we also look at the neighborhood scale, and that's where some of our design assistance comes in. So we're thinking about street corridors and connections between places in a given community. And then, of course, we think of green infrastructure at that site level. So we're talking rain gardens and bioswales and all those low-impact development approaches. And sort of originally, green infrastructure at EPA was focused on water quality. We were thinking about stormwater mitigation, how to reduce runoff. But we've sort of added to the program over time and the ways that we approach green infrastructure, looking at all the multiple community benefits. So we think about it also from perspective of how can we improve pedestrian and bicycle corridors? How can we help communities increase property values? How can we support their recreational economies? How can we sort of tie it to their long-term land use planning goals? And then, of course, there are a number of, thinking about future conditions, climate resilience benefits. So not only do we know that green infrastructure can help to manage flooding, but it can help communities prepare for drought, reduce the urban heat island impacts, and then thinking about lowering building energy demands, spending less money on energy managing water, and then protecting those valuable coastal areas and thinking of those important ecosystem services. So we're really looking at those connections between different benefits for the environment, for the economy, and for the community. So now I'm going to talk about a few of the projects where we've sort of put these principles into action in partnership between EPA and FEMA. So EPA has funded a number of projects to integrate green infrastructure into hazard mitigation plans and water quality plans. So where can these two different plans that communities and states are doing come together for mutual benefit? So this lists a number of the projects that we have done on the ground in partnership with each other, and I'll talk about a few of these different hazards that were addressed through green infrastructure approaches. So in Ashland, Oregon, we looked at a few different hazards. We looked at ways that green infrastructure can reduce floods, flood impacts, help with slope stabilization, and manage for wildfire risks. In Albany, New York, we looked at severe storms, especially winter storms, and those impacts on flooding. In our partnership with the state of Massachusetts, we were looking at statewide drought reduction through green infrastructure. And then I'll just mention the last one. Most recently in Maricopa County, Arizona, we were looking at green infrastructure approaches for dealing with extreme heat. And so this map on the right is from the project we did in Massachusetts, looking at site suitability for infiltration of stormwater to help with drought mitigation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ashland project in particular as an example of finding those connections between natural hazard mitigation and other co-benefits. So in Ashland, we started out the project looking at GIS mapping, again, thinking about what sites are suitable for green infrastructure. And then on top of that, thinking about the ecosystem services evaluation. So where do you get the biggest bang for your buck? Thinking back to the benefit cost analysis that needs to be done as part of these plans. And then our team for the Ashland project sort of sifted through all of Ashland's local codes and ordinances and looked at opportunities to minimize impervious areas, limit disturbance of undeveloped land, and ways to protect large-scale ecosystems, conserving open space, and possibilities for constructing wetlands. And then we made some recommendations to the city of Ashland. So we identified some specific floodwater storage projects. So after doing that GIS mapping and ecosystem services evaluation, where were the sort of best opportunities to implement green infrastructure now? And then another recommendation was thinking again at that neighborhood scale for green infrastructure, implementing green streets program citywide. And then beyond thinking about public right-of-way and public infrastructure, where could Ashland incentivize private landowners to retrofit their sites to minimize impervious surfaces and start to manage some of those floodwaters and take it off of the public system. And then, of course, back to the original goal, which was putting all of these principles and strategies into the update for the Jackson County Hazard Mitigation Plan. And then to switch gears a little bit, I want to talk about some of the design work that we've done to really sort of bring a lot of these policy approaches to life through pretty pictures that help people sort of visualize what this can really look like, how these changes can come about. So in Mexico Beach, Florida, EPA and FEMA partnered with a bunch of other state and local agencies to help Mexico Beach build in green infrastructure as part of its recovery from Hurricane Michael. And so a lot of different types of infrastructure were heavily impacted by Hurricane Michael. They had impacts to their stormwater system, wastewater system, their highways, their power grid. And so the goal of this design work was to think about the investments that were going to be made as part of the recovery out of that disaster. How could they mitigate against future impacts while also improving the community from an environmental, an economic, recreational, and an infrastructure capacity perspective. And so this is an image of the 8th Street Canal, which formerly drained stormwater out directly onto the beach, and this was a point of entry for floodwaters to really come into the city of Mexico Beach and cause so much damage. So these designs and the approaches with all of the different partners in the room came together to say, what if we closed off that canal and opened up a pedestrian and bike pathway straight out to the beach, connected to a larger bike pedestrian corridor, and made new recreational opportunities, and that was paired with the creation of some new wetlands nearby that would actually take on those floodwaters. So you're looking at all of those multiple benefits by having those different partners in the room. And other federal partners that were right there with EPA and FEMA on this project included the Army Corps, Department of Interior, Health and Human Services. And this was such a great project, and people really, again, they find that these designs just sort of bring all of these principles to life and bring people out to really participate in the process. And now EPA and FEMA are partnering on additional projects in the Florida Panhandle for other communities to sort of replicate what we learned here in Mexico Beach. So I think there are so many great projects. This work has been done in the past, and we're happy to share them with you. And though I don't have a link to a list of contacts, at the end you'll see my email, and I help manage this partnership between EPA and FEMA, which really lives not only in DC, but it lives in each of our regional offices where our EPA and FEMA folks are partnered and working together all the time. So if anybody wants to reach out about talking to EPA and FEMA about these projects or what's possible in your communities, I'm happy to be an initial point of contact for you on that. So I'll end there, and I'll pass the baton off to Sarah at the Nature Conservancy.
Thank you, Abby. So my name is Sarah Murdoch, and I am the Director of U.S. Climate Resilience at the Nature Conservancy. And I'm thrilled to be part of this webinar today, and thank you to FEMA for holding it and to including us. And we're really excited about this new BRIC program and the potential for resources being invested in nature-based approaches. So the Nature Conservancy, just for those who don't know, we're a global conservation organization dedicated to conserving the lands and waters on which life depends. And we work in all 50 states and in 72 countries. And we use a collaborative approach to doing our work that engages local communities, governments, private partners, as well as landowners in achieving our work. And our work addressing both flood impacts and drought impacts and wildfires really focuses on approaches that use science-driven strategies that seek to avoid further impacts and mitigate existing impacts. And much of the work we've done is on flood risk impacts. So we're really looking at driving smart development strategies that work with nature, not against nature. And this is both an effective and cost-effective approach that we think our nation really needs to embrace. So investing in floodplains makes sense for a lot of the reasons we've heard previously. They really provide a range of benefits. Abby touched on this very well. We know that floodplains reduce flood risk to downstream and inland communities, but they also help with improved water quality and improved habitat for fish and wildlife. And they also just enhance quality of life for communities and often provide valuable areas for recreation and access to rivers and coasts. So the Nature Conservancy has teamed with insurance risk modelers to look at the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of investments in nature-based approaches like coastal wetlands restoration, enhancement of oyster reefs, coral reefs, mangroves. And these investments are shown to be effective in reducing wave impacts and also helping absorb floodwaters. For example, during Hurricane Sandy in 2012, the coastal wetlands in place in the Northeast prevented $625 million in damages. And this was a study that was done and published in scientific reports. And a similar analysis was done in Florida to show the value of mangroves in place during Hurricane Irma. And they showed that $1.5 billion in damages were avoided. So the best way to explain this nature-based work is just to dive into a couple of examples. But before I do that, it's important to note that in order to invest in successful nature-based flood risk projects at scale really requires scientific analysis and planning processes before knowing where and what projects to invest in. So I wanted to put a point on that, and Abby touched on that as well, and I can go into that more in our Q&A session. So this project I'm going to talk about first is from the Puyallup River in the community of Orting in the state of Washington. The river system has experienced chronic flooding, and during a storm in 2009, the river crested at 16,900 cubic feet per second, and homes and roads and schools were all flooded. 26,000 people had to evacuate. It was the largest evacuation in the state. And then fast forward to 2014, and the river crested again, this time at over 16,000 cubic feet per second, yet there were almost no evacuations and flood damages. So the difference between the two times was that there was an extensive floodplain restoration that took place. The project more than doubled the width of the river by setting back 1.5 miles of levee and reconnecting a major side channel, giving salmon a place to swim and rear, and allowing floodwaters to spread out and slow down. The project also created a riverfront park for the community to enjoy. It was so effective that the National Weather Service changed their warnings to a much higher river crest level. And Washington, and this is just one project in Washington State that is part of an overall program called Floodplains by Design, which was launched in 2013. And it recognizes the benefits of investing in floodplain restoration work that's really aimed at yielding multiple benefits. And it's led the state to appropriating $115 million to support large-scale multiple benefit projects across the state, and it's still going strong. For the next project example, I'll take you to the community of Bayou La Battery in Alabama and to a place called Lightning Point. So Bayou La Battery is considered the seafood capital of Alabama, and it's a town steeped in Southern history with French and Southeastern Asian influence. And the community sought to make an investment as a result of rapidly eroding shoreline in the face of many large and smaller scale coastal events. And the need also to improve the quality of the environment and enhance accessibility to members of the community. So this is the before picture of the area. And this picture is the work near complete. The project is designed to achieve, again, multiple benefits. First is shoreline protection. The construction of about 1.5 miles of segmented breakwaters and 2 jetties provide a buffer from waves and boat wakes. And then there was extensive habitat creation, over 40 acres of marsh and tidal creeks and upland habitat that support a range of fish and wildlife. And some of this was created through a beneficial use of dredge material using thin layer deposition to build and nourish the marsh. Also, allowing for recreation was the goal of the project, and they created walking paths and a lookout point for the community to enjoy. And the work's already been tested with a storm that hit in June. The storm was a typical of about a 2-year storm, and it produced about a 4-foot storm surge, and no structural damage has occurred at the site as a result of that. And you can see it's not quite done yet. So in closing, I hope these brief examples have inspired you to think about nature-based approaches to disaster risk reduction, and I look forward to your questions. And now I'll turn it over to Chad from ASFPM to wrap it up.
Thank you for the introduction, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody who's participating. I am Chad Verginnis, Executive Director of the Association of State Floodplain Managers. ASFPM is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing flood losses in the nation, as well as recognizing and enhancing the natural functions of floodplains. I want to start off with a story from earlier in my career when I was the State Hazard Mitigation Officer in Ohio. The city of Cuyahoga Falls was one of the Northeast Ohio communities most severely impacted by flooding in the 2000s and declared as a federal disaster area twice in successive years. City officials worked with my former office on a project to reduce stormwater runoff in a neighborhood that experienced significant and repetitive flooding. With the use of FEMA funds, the city purchased and demolished 4 adjacent flood-prone homes in a low-lying area. In their place, the city created an engineered rain garden along with smaller retention areas and other best management practices incorporated into the design. This project, as shown in the picture here, is neighborhood scale. It increases public education. It includes ADA accessibility. It incorporates low-impact design and non-native including non-invasive native plants. The cost of this project, the rain garden, was about $160,000 and results in about 30,000 gallons of stormwater retention. And so the point of this, as well as the balance of my presentation, is to show the value from a project level of nature-based solutions. And I would say the first piece of advice I would have to anybody that is a prospective applicant to the BRIC program is to dare to dream. One thing that I've noticed over my career is that we often don't know what we don't know. And what I mean by that is that I think ingrained in many of us are a certain set of solutions for flooding problems. Yet there are many, many innovative solutions. Technology is constantly evolving. And utilizing FEMA programs like BRIC to dream of the future, the resilient future that your community wants. And so a listing here of some of the different types of projects that are possible under the BRIC program, and some of those were alluded to earlier. But the pictures on this slide, I think, show the value and the potential. So which of your communities has a school? Okay, I bet most of them do. I know even some of the smallest communities where I grew up in had those as well, and every school has an associated schoolyard. Well, this set of pictures shows the Space to Grow program in Chicago. Now, I don't want you, for those of you from smaller communities, to say, oh, geez, this is Chicago, it doesn't apply to me. This most definitely applies to you. And it really serves as a model for green schoolyard programs nationwide. They are not only used as outdoor classrooms, but serve as community parks outside of school hours. Nearly all communities have schools, and these schools have the schoolyards. And in this particular schoolyard, I believe that it serves to also retain and detain about 300,000 gallons of storm water. Planners know that in especially dense urban areas, there's an ongoing need for adequate green and recreational spaces. And this is just one innovative approach to those kinds of spaces. So you would start by, again, educating yourselves in terms of what options are possible. You may have local universities as well as consultants and other experts that may have a lot of other potential solutions than the ones you're thinking of. Next, you then want to move on to considerations for your particular projects. One project that is very familiar to a lot of us that do flood mitigation are buyout projects. But the challenge I have for all of you is to make smarter buyout projects. Again, on that first slide where I showed the rain garden, that was part of a FEMA hazard mitigation grant program project. But perhaps you can tweak the project application to include a smarter and more nature-based and effective reuse of that land than simply seeding and grading, such as a rain garden. So again, on your buyout projects in particular, think about how you could have a smarter reuse of that land. Secondly, you need to look at multiple funding sources. In fact, sometimes we see the most innovative mitigation not happening through FEMA funds at all, even though the project may have been developed or thought about during the FEMA application process. But in another project that we worked with in Ohio, we used Ohio EPA funding to restore wetland areas on a multiple acre project site that formerly had been wetlands. The next thing you need to consider is whether you're going to do all of this in one project or several projects. The reality is in most communities in the country, mitigation happens over years, if not decades. And so you don't need to necessarily conquer all of your flooding issues with one project. And in fact, from a cost standpoint, it may be necessary to spread those costs over multiple years and multiple projects. What other plans and community goals do you have? Do you have an open space and parks plan, for example, that maybe shows a neighborhood that needs some green space that you could use a mitigation project innovatively to do that? And finally, think about your time frame for the project. And again, I would encourage you to think about the fact that flood problems weren't created in a day, they weren't created in a year, they often were created over decades, if not centuries. And an adequate time frame, I think, to mitigate is going to be important too. Yet also be mindful of the time frame associated with the mitigation, with the BRIC program. Now, a couple of resources I wanted to point out that may be available to you, and this resource goes kind of in the Dare to Dream category, but this is the Naturally Resilient Communities website. And this website is a partnership among several organizations, including ASFPM and the Nature Conservancy. And this has case studies as well as different kinds of mitigation applications, especially those that are nature-based. So please take a look at this. And then on this next slide, these are a couple of other mitigation resources that, in my opinion, I think are very helpful. FEMA has, so again, you can Google a lot of these and pull those up, whether it's innovative drought and flood mitigation projects that FEMA has. The Corps of Engineers produced a really interesting atlas on engineering with nature, the EPA Green Infrastructure website. The Georgetown Climate Center is doing a lot in this space. And then also the ELI and the University of North Carolina has a really good guide on floodplain buyouts and the smarter use of those lands. So again, I think my take-home message here is that really think outside of the box, dare to dream, because I can guarantee you if you're just innovative enough, the BRIC program can at least be part of the solution. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Camille.
Thanks so much, Chad. And let me thank all of our panelists, including Art, Adam, Abby, and Sarah. There was so much good information to share today. I know all of you could have done a full hour. We have a few minutes left, and so I want to give all of our panelists a chance to respond to a question and give some more information to our participants. So We're going to focus on future conditions first. So the first question will be for you, Art and Adam. When we think about our applicants and our sub-applicants, so our states, our locals, our tribes and our territories who are going to be developing these mitigation projects, can you think about how they might incorporate future conditions into those applications or into those projects?
All right, thanks, Camille. Yeah, so speaking then directly to the applicants, integrating future conditions information into your project is really best done within the context of an existing community future conditions analysis and adaptation plan. This important step supports decision-making when faced with the high degree of uncertainty for future conditions, and it builds community support for projects when it's time to fund them. Even without an adaptation analysis and plan in place, you can still incorporate future conditions into your project. So one of the key questions you want to answer at the start of your project is, how long do you want what you're protecting to last? Your answer will direct the time horizons of your future conditions analysis. So then go on to consider the hazards your project will mitigate risk for and what functions your project will need to protect. This will direct the future conditions information you'll need to access, which might include things like your community's future development plans, forecasted population and demographic changes, and climate change implications for natural hazards in the project area. So Adam earlier shared some great information that can help you locating some of those climate change resources. So with your future conditions information in hand, you'll be ready for project planning and design. So start with a detailed risk assessment based on your analysis, and this assessment should include future risks to your project, the timing of those future risks, so you can know when a risk will be the greatest threat, and the costs associated with the risks, including impacts to the social, economic, environmental, and cultural values affected. Once you've identified all of these risks, you can then determine what your options are for you to mitigate against each one of them. So I'll recommend our FEMA, our BCA tool, which allows for the inclusion of future conditions information and can support your analysis and decision-making across multiple project options so you can get the highest return on your investment. And some of NOAA's sea level rise values are pre-populated into FEMA's BCA tool, but you can also use your own analysis in the BCA for sea level rise or any other future conditions data, as long as you provide defensible documentation of your analysis in your application. And again, for help applying future conditions information to your project, I'll encourage you to take advantage of our free BCA technical assistance. Contact information is available on my slides from earlier, and you can also find the contact information on the internet. So I'll also just make one more plug here. You can find more details on some of the process I just walked you through if you go to the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, and Adam had posted a link to that in his presentation. It's also in some of the materials associated with this webinar. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Art. I'll just build on that quickly. I agree. The Climate Resilience Toolkit is a great resource. They have this framework, 5 steps to resilience. If you don't have a lot of experience or with this type of resilience planning, it's a great framework. And I also just want to encourage folks that many of the types of analysis that Art described have been completed in many jurisdictions by either state coastal management programs or many of their affiliated partners or some of the other NOAA programs that I mentioned previously. So I really just encourage you before you start developing your own information that you look to see what's already been developed by some of NOAA's partners. And the regional contacts listed in the handout are great places to turn to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam and Art. I'm going to switch it over to our non-governmental organization partners who are joining us today. So this one is for you, Sarah and Chad. As we think about, both of you talked about some great resources that you have available for applicants and sub-applicants. I just wanted to give you some time if you could share anything else regarding resources or assistance that you know partner organizations could help applicants and sub-applicants with as they're filling out their BRIC sub-applications.
Sure, I can start and then turn it over to you, Chad, if that's all right. So we've heard a lot about the need to do kind of collaborative planning processes, and I think Adam talked about some great resources from NOAA that help support that. I'll just give another shout out for the digital post program that we're a part of. There's also the Army Corps led Silver Jackets program that exists in many states, and we've found that to be a really valuable construct for helping drive some of these collaborative planning processes. We're involved in one now around the Missouri River and a lot of the chronic flooding that's taken place there in the last couple of years. And it's, multiple regions and, hundreds of partners. So it's really complicated and complex. But that Silver Jackets really helps bring people together and as a way to start to work through those problems and challenges. And then I will say, the Nature Conservancy uses, again, a lot of science-based approaches, and the way we usually do that is building decision support tools, like starting with a lot of the NOAA data on sea level rise and storm surge. So we have a coastalresilience.org that's a publicly available decision support tool. And what we've also built into it, aside from the risk analysis, is also solutions, nature-based solutions. So you can actually go and look at your region's nature-based solution on that tool and see and start to analyze some of the risk reduction value that might provide. We also have one for the kind of Mississippi River Basin, so the whole interior of the U.S., called the Floodplain Explorer tool. That's also publicly available.
Yes, and what I'll focus on are a couple of those local partnerships as you're developing your project application a little bit more locally. Some non-traditional partnerships that I've seen work. First of all, check out your local universities. I know that there was, in some of your universities, you may have an institute that helps local governments. You may also, your land-grant colleges have the university extension, cooperative extension service. If nothing else, they sometimes can even help with facilitating meetings. In your communities, you may also have foundations. Not only can they be funders, but they also may be supporters of technical assistance. And then finally, look in places that are totally unexpected. I was reading with interest an article on the community relocation project in Newtok, Alaska. And in Newtok, the U.S. military has a community partnership program that the U.S. military, I think through the Air National Guard, is helping with that community relocation project. So again, look high and low and in non-traditional places. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. And then I'll finish the questions out with Abby. You gave a great example with Mexico Beach in Florida. I wanted to see if you could think of any other best practices or lessons learned that you could share where communities are using nature-based solutions putting into their mitigation projects.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, as you know, we partnered, EPA and FEMA partnered on a toolkit recently called the Regional Resilience Toolkit. And so, just thinking about this issue of the fact that disasters happen at a regional scale. They don't recognize city boundaries. So where can you find multi-jurisdictional projects, especially for green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? When you start to get at that larger scale, you can see really big benefits and impacts coming from those types of projects. So that Regional Resilience Toolkit encourages that sort of larger scale partnerships, so bringing in all of these NGO and private sector partners to be part of that conversation, but really looking for also that peer-to-peer network that happens from one community to another. So even if you're not doing really large-scale green infrastructure investments or projects, maybe you can replicate similar approaches from one community to the next. So I would just encourage people to think about those larger-scale investments and opportunities when looking at nature-based solutions.
Thank you so much, Abby. I want to thank all of our panelists today, as well as everyone over the past 5 weeks, both inside of FEMA and with our partner, other federal agencies, and our partner organizations who have joined us on this trip of the BRIC Summer Engagement Series. But this isn't the only time that you're going to be able to hear about the BRIC program. I am very excited to say with confidence that we are very close to having the BRIC Notice of Funding Opportunity posted. And once we do, starting in mid-August, we're going to do webinar series where we dive deep into the NOFOs, or Notice of Funding Opportunities, for both BRIC and the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, FMA. With that, also having lots of time for Q&A, which is something we haven't been able to do in this series. So that way we'll be able to live take your questions. These are everyone that spoke today or was on the panel today has been very lovely to provide their email addresses, so you'll see those on that slide, as well as a link to the BRIC website. That's where all these PowerPoints and resources, as they're ready, will be uploaded, as well as links to the YouTube videos for these presentations once they're completed. You'll also see there a link or a web address for hazard mitigation assistance. That is where you can get all the updates or sign up for updates for BRIC as well as the other HMA programs. So with that, I say thank you so much for attending today, and I ask if everyone, before you sign off, if you could fill out our poll, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.